Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. I'm joined today by Reno Domenico. He is the chairman of the Democrats Abroad Ukraine. Reno, many thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
We wanted you to come to speak with us today about American support for Ukraine. You're an American citizen, obviously.
Correct.
Based here in Ukraine for many years.
Yes.
You run a business school here, aside from other things. But I read recently that in the Pentagon, one expert had stepped down last week, and when she stepped down, she said that on Ukraine and on America's stance towards Russia, she had hoped that the Obama administration would have taken a stronger stance to deter Russian aggression in Ukraine, which we've seen here over the last 18 months or so. I wanted to have your view on that. Do you feel that America's response to everything that's been going on here has been adequate, or would you have liked to have seen more?
Well, first of all, I don't speak for the United States government, as you know, and we do have an official policy, and our ambassador articulates that. And I support the policy that the ambassador and our government has been pursuing in Ukraine. Obviously, as someone who lives here and spends a lot of time here and has a business here, what happens in this country is very important to me, as well as the fact that it's a very compelling and interesting place and with wonderful, wonderful people. So it's very important to me personally how we conduct our policy and what happens. I think that the United States has found itself really spread rather thin around the world. We have tremendous commitments, both militarily and diplomatically, that have really stretched the resources of our government beyond what a lot of people probably understand. Domestic American politics really trumps foreign policy in many regards for most Americans. And for most Americans, Ukraine is unfortunately still a very remote place. I think they think Ukraine is on TV rather than anywhere else geographically. So in terms of America's national interest, probably our public doesn't see what has happened here as something as essential as, for example, immigration from Southern America and some other domestic problems that we really struggle with.
But do you feel that actually there is quite a lot at stake here? Do you think do you feel like the level of recognition in the US has not been as high as it should be? Because I mean, potentially what we're talking about here is the post-war international order. You don't change borders by force anymore, and that's what's happened.
Well, I think the use of force at all times is a mistake. I always admired the fact that India was able to wrest away its independence relatively peacefully when you look at it historically. And if Gandhi could do it in India, then I think things could have been handled here in a much different way. I think once you introduce violence into an environment, it's very difficult to extricate yourself from that. And I think another tendency is to point blame always in a specific direction. And I don't think that's useful either. I think that how this all happened is a very complicated and long story. And I think it goes back to even when the Soviet Union broke up in independence. I think American policy towards the former Soviet Union has never been very coherent, to tell you the truth, both under Republican and Democratic administrations. I think we've made a lot of mistakes, and the consequences of those come home to roost sometimes.
And when you say this sort of dates back to the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, are you talking there about domestically here in Ukraine and in other former Soviet states, or are you talking about more of the way that they are viewed from abroad?
I think that when the Soviet Union collapsed and we had a relatively cooperative government in Russia, who was very interested in cooperation with the United States for a variety of reasons. The United States officially pursued a policy of cooperation, while we also continued basically to treat them as some kind of enemy, and we continued to pursue some military objectives, which I think have been greatly misunderstood, or easily were misunderstood. And
for example, the expansion of NATO, do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that had to be looked at as, I may see that as benign.
The Kremlin doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I play chess sometimes when I have time as a hobby. And if you're playing on that side of the board and you're slowly getting surrounded, you have to wonder about why. And I think that that policy has led to some of the reaction that we see. I think the United States preferred a much more compliant Russia than the one they have to deal with now. And I think it's really unfortunate because all of this is not good for anybody. I don't think it's been good for Russia. It's certainly not been good for Ukraine. And I don't think it's helped the United States particularly. So it's unfortunate. Once you introduce violence into a situation, then I think it becomes very difficult to resolve. I think there were other ways diplomatically to have included Russia in a conversation, in a serious conversation about a pan-European solution. And I think those opportunities have been missed, and here we are.
And do you think, it's interesting what you say there about violence, because it seems to me that the Maidan revolution that we had here, sort of just about 2 years ago now, it started up, was in some senses violent from the very beginning. I mean, the violence began here in central Kiev. It's now in East Ukraine. I feel like there is a link there that change in this country and perhaps in this part of the world, in the former Soviet Union, has to come about somehow through violent means. It almost feels like.
Yeah, it does, and that's an emotional, visceral level of understanding. And again, when I do get involved locally, it's been in terms of election observation and trying to help build the democratic institutions in Ukraine that really are completely counteropposed to any kind of violent political solutions. Because again, as you said, once violence is introduced into a situation, it's very hard to de-link them from the things that follow. And once blood is let in one side, consequences are very severe. And this happens even in small neighborhoods. I mean, you know, not to give you the idea that the U.S. doesn't have its own problems. We do.
Sure.
Guns and so on. So
sure. Well, on a macro level, though, I mean, in the West, for example, we use these democratic institutions to solve our problems and our disagreements and find consensus, and we try. And of course, it doesn't always. You know, not everyone is obviously happy with this, but we don't have violence. You know, on such a scale. We do, for example, see more violence in the Middle East, for example. We can look at Syria right now and say that, okay, there's a state which the institutions have failed, and now we have civil war. Ukraine is not really on that level like Syria, and it's still trying to build these institutions to find better ways to solve its problems. But it seems to me that Ukraine is somewhere in the middle here.
Yeah, it's a shame that we have to say, well, we're not in the level of Syria yet. And that doesn't help when you asked me in the very beginning, how does the United States view the situation in Ukraine? I think on TV it looks very similar. This gets back down to basic economics, which is, again, why I'm involved here. I mean, I work here primarily to provide business education to people because it's economics that drives all of this. If people are employed, if they have good jobs, if they can buy food, if they can go on a small vacation, if they can have a car, happy family, house, clean air, you're not going to have this step to violence happen so easily. In a situation like this, where politics is very tied to economics and where people don't see a future in any other way, it's very quick to be able to move people to violence. It's very easy. I think it could happen at any time, and we've seen it happened on one side, it happened on another side.
We've seen it on, I mean, several occasions throughout Ukraine's history.
Yes,
since
unfortunately, in the short time that Ukraine has been independent, it hasn't had an easy ride. And again, the reasons for that are multiple. To some extent, it's Ukraine's own fault. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of people here did not take self-government very seriously. They didn't think that they should hold their leaders accountable. And so for a long time, things kind of drifted in a way that has not been very productive.
Reno, we're almost out of time, unfortunately. So just as a sort of closing thought, I wonder, what I'm hearing from you then is that if Ukraine is to move forward, it seems to me that you would advocate that we've got to look at the economics first and foremost. We've got to get the economy growing again. We've got to cut down on corruption, get people back to work. Would you agree that that's where you would like to see this thing?
I think it's even more basic. I think it's to get people to work, not back to work. They've never been to work since the Soviet Union collapsed. You've not had a fully employed economy here. You've had basically some kind of depression-level economy ever since. The system that has replaced the Soviet Union is not a normal economy. And without that, yes, there's really not going to be an easy road. And all of the things that we're seeing manifest themselves really will not go away. And you mentioned the Middle East. What drives the violence in the Middle East? Is it because Islam is a dangerous religion? I don't think so. I think what drives it is that there are just so many people without a decent living that they turn to violence as an alternative and a lashing out. And I think that can happen here, and I think it can happen again.
Reno, many thanks for joining us. It's been a very interesting discussion.
Well, I enjoyed it too, so anytime.
You've been watching Viewpoint. I've been joined by Reno Domenico. He's the chairman of the Democrats Abroad Ukraine organization. You've been watching Viewpoint. We're out of time. Join us again for another edition.